Hi there, it's Kevin with Gonro Games. So all this talk about Universes Beyond has reminded me of another game that used to exist that actually was a pretty good game. And it started as like just a generic board game, card game, dice game. It was called Couriers. I don't know how many of you remember the game Couriers, but it's a dice rolling game that utilized cards, and depending on what cards you used and what dice you rolled, they'd have different effects. And the game then morphed into what is called Dice Masters. So now let's talk about Dice Masters and how Universes Beyond already failed Dice Masters. Now, let me premise this by saying that I think that Magic the Gathering is eons ahead of Dice Masters would have ever been. And so it's already starting at a better premise than taking like a very, I would say, not so popular, but popular enough board game and turning it into a collectible card game or collectible dice game, whatever you want to call Dice Masters. So it's not apples to apples to compare the two. I understand that perfectly, but I do want to make the comparison of when Dice Masters, WizKids, that controlled Dice Masters, decided to go down what I like to call the clickbait buys, the IPs, the acquiring IPs, the FOMO buys, where they thought that they could just take the game mechanics and all of these different IPs would just be enough to make the game successful. Now, a little bit of backstory. Let's dig through my mess here. So back in this mess, so I got these boxes in front of it. Back in this mess, hiding away, is some Dice Masters I've just been too lazy to unload because I don't even know if there is a market for this. But this is how much we actually played this game at the store. It was actually very robust. This entire box is full of Dice Masters. It's full of cards and dice from this game. So let's just open up a pack here. It'll be fun for nostalgic sake of opening up a pack of, let's see here, X-Men, Uncanny X-Men. So Dice Masters started, the very first set was called Avengers versus X-Men. So the comic book craze was huge. This is about 10 years ago when the game came out, I believe, is when Dice Masters got popular. And the very first set, Avengers versus X-Men, had such an amazing reception that there were $100 chase cards. Black Widow was like $150 at one point for the Black Widow. It was a very aggressive card. Now this game plays similar to Magic, but different enough that it has, maybe I'll have to show people how to play this game, but I mean, it's a dead game, so I don't know why anyone would care to see this. Let's actually go out here. We'll open up this pack. Let me grab some other stuff here and we'll look at the kind of Dice Masters binder that's right here. Maybe we'll get some nostalgia in as everything falls out. But yeah, let's go into the game room here. I'm going to put my camera down and we'll talk about Dice Masters and just the pitfall of relying on trendy IPs to think that will be enough for your game to last the test of time. So I've never been like a fan of WizKids because they tend to do this a lot with the games that they make, is they do half-assed and they are so obsessed with the short-term sales that oftentimes they can't like foresee or can't plan for the future. And I was calling out Dice Masters from the beginning that they needed to be more community oriented, they needed to do more organized play, and they needed to release things not so quickly. So the first set actually had enough breathing room for people to learn the game, understand the game, start to get a feel for the game, the cards that were good in the meta, and it also gave back some feedback to design on how to design cards, what cards were overpowered, what cards were underpowered, what strategies need a little bit of help, some other balancing things. And there was enough time between Avengers versus X-Men. I can't believe the second set, was it this Uncanny X-Men? This might actually just be the second set that came out. I'm not sure if it was another X-Men set or something. Like, remember there was like Wolverine in the second set and whatnot. But it was perfect. It was a perfect amount of, and it was very grassroots community driven. People picked up the game. I'm sure it was introduced by people that knew how to play Couriers and liked Couriers. And then it was picked up because, you know, people were looking, this is a time period, remember 10 years ago, Magic was going through its first little kind of community outrage, even back then, that people were desperate for like an alternative to Magic the Gathering. We also had the success of Magic the Gathering to the point to where like there were so many spin-offs of people were, this was the time when Magic had hit its pinnacle and people were kind of bored of it, but they still liked the whole trading card game aspect and kind of community, and people were itching for something different. And so Dice Masters came along at the perfect time And people really got into this game to where stores could not keep this product in stock. You had, of course, the scalpers. They were going crazy, and it was just the perfect atmosphere for this game to thrive. And I will 100% endorse and admit that Dice Masters was a really, really good, mechanically sound game. It was different enough from Magic. It had enough complexity and strategy that kept people entertained. And it was very well received, and there were already championships, store championships, like regionals, nationals, worlds, and they were very, very popular. Before tournaments, cards would spike up in price when the teams that were seeing play and the dice that were seeing play, they would get expensive. And so it had all the right recipe for a successful game that could last a long time. And I actually don't think that people got bored of Dice Masters. I don't think that people necessarily hated the mechanics of it. It was just a dead on arrival type game. The main thing that happened with Dice Masters was WizKids got addicted to the IPs. So they thought, okay, so X-Men versus Avengers was so popular. Let's go into the DC universe. And at first, that's not that big of a stretch. We still have superheroes playing against superheroes. We have Marvel meets DC. Everyone loves that. I mean, that's a kind of a comic book trope that I wonder if a DC, Superman were to fight Silver Surfer or whatever. I mean, that people have wanted crossovers forever. And so you didn't have to be a Marvel fan. You could now be a DC fan and engage in Dice Masters and kind of play against it. So it kind of worked. And WizKids was still making the right decisions. They were still trying to be community oriented. They were still focusing on the playing the game. And little by little, that culture started to change within WizKids corporate, where they're like, no, we got to grab as many IPs as possible. So then they're like, Yu-Gi-Oh, let's do Yu-Gi-Oh. And Yu-Gi-Oh was kind of a smash hit. There were some cards in that were pretty good. Brought in the Yu-Gi-Oh fans into the dice rolling genre, or whatever you call this type of game, and it did really well. And then like, okay, well, Yu-Gi-Oh did well. Let's do D&D. And so they did D&D. And then it was right after D&D where it's like, well, we still need to make sets for Marvel. We still need to keep, we bought the IP. We still need to make sets for Marvel. We still need to make sets for DC. And then that's where it started to become very convoluted. I'm thinking we're going to see the same thing with Magic the Gathering, where it's like the biggest problem with Dice Masters too is they didn't have a clear plan of addressing how that they were going to even do formats. So at first it was like anything, okay, we've had this 2 sets that are both superhero-based cards. Let's just have them be face off against each other in this format. That's fine. They're okay. And then when it was like Yu-Gi-Oh and D&D came in, it's like, okay, well, now we need to have some clear, concise things. Should Yu-Gi-Oh cards be able to be played against superhero cards? And it was the problem with Dice Masters. It did start to get a little mechanically like different with these sets. So Yu-Gi-Oh had monsters and that worked specifically off of like heroes and monsters, whereas the superhero sets had villains and superheroes. And so there wasn't like this clear meshing. They had to like reword stuff, and it got like, well, does this card actually work against this? This is pretty narrow. This mechanic only works for these specific cards in this set. And again, the biggest issue is WizKids didn't ever really address those things in time. They were too obsessed with coming out with the next IP then to start to really flesh out these design factors that were happening in their game. And it started to lose focus of what the game was and how the game was played and what were the rules and what were the formats. And that's when you really started to see the game die, was right after D&D. And instead of addressing those issues though, oh no, we're doing great. We're doing record sales. People are buying our product. It was on TCG Player. If you go on to TCG Player, they usually have the top games at the top that are selling. And now you'll see, Pokemon, you'll see One Piece up there, you'll see Lorcana, you'll see Magic the Gathering. Dice Masters used to be a top game. It used to be places like Troll and Told and Cool Stuff Inc. would actually buy Dice Masters cards. Local game stores stocked Dice Masters. Almost every local game store stocked Dice Masters. There were weekly tournaments. We even ran it here in Podunk, Richfield, Utah. We had enough people playing Dice Masters to get excited about. And one of the main reasons is I really like the game, so I cultivated it. But anyway, it was enough to engage people. But WizKids, this is so close to Wiz the Coast, again, they didn't even like put out a catalog of all the cards in existence, and rulings would take forever because, of course, the way that some cards interacted with other cards, created some confusion, and people didn't know the exact ruling of how these cards would interact, and it took forever for WizKids to actually rule on these things, and then you could really start to see the game break down. Well, instead of addressing these issues, WizKids doubled down, and they just went hard on trying to find every possible thing that they could put into Dice Masters, where I believe did it get, not Star Wars, but Star Trek? I believe so. Maybe I'm wrong. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I think they did have some cutesy sets they started to bring in, and then it got really crazy when they got like WWE. And it's not that big of a stretch if they would have narrowed the formats to like, okay, we have superheroes, we have in this pile that face off each other, we have more of this Yu-Gi-Oh! or coming from other card games like D&D, in this other sector could play against each other, or fantasy or something like that. And then we could have a format where anything goes. That way the people that could play, that just wanted to play the superheroes, could play the superheroes. People wanted the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, could play the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And people that didn't care, that just wanted as many pool possible, could play that sort of format. But instead of really doing that, WizKids, nope, they're on to the next thing and on the next thing. And what I like to make reference of this company is they became the clickbait company. They became the whole thing that, like, instead of focusing on that, let's just put these at the checkout stands, and people that just like Marvel are going to buy it. So let's not focus on the people that want to play the game. Let's just focus on people that like Marvel. And they'll be at the checkout stand like, oh, I like Marvel, I'll purchase this. And it worked for maybe a year longer, and this game absolutely crashed. So it's sad. It's sad where this went, because, like I said, I really believe that this game had legs and was a fun, enjoyable game. And I don't think that Wizards of the Coast is too big to fail. I don't think that Magic is too big of a game that if they fall down this trap. And I think a lot of people, a lot of other YouTubers have called this out too. Look at the amount of releases that are happening. Like the Universes Beyond is just no one can keep up with anything. No one can keep up with storylines now. Not that it was a big deal to begin with, but when you lose your focus on creating a game that has an entire atmosphere around it with playing that game, and just focus on what's the next big cultural IP that we can milk, it has some consequences, and those consequences are very real. And I think that Dice Masters is a warning for Wizards of the Coast that, even though you could have the best game in the world, if you really focus on just selling to, fanboys of a particular IP, it just becomes so shallow at that point, and people lose interest. So anyway, this was a fun little, let's see if we can we can kind of show some of these cards here. Man, it's still terrible with this camera. So yeah, let's go ahead and look at these things. So little bit of a throwback to Dice Masters here. It was a fun game. So right here on the bottom, so you have dice. So you can see that the dice with these cards came with the pack. So this Quicksilver, for example, it has a dice here that has different sides of the dice. And so on your turn, you're going to be rolling dice, depending. So you start with these on your play field. So you have a team that you don't draw cards. They just come on your playfield, and they are going to tell you what your dice do. So the dice are like, you have a dice bag that you're going to be drawing from, and then you're going to be rolling those dice, and those dice are going to be doing different things. So for example, these character dice, they're going to have different effects. So this guy can add lightning bolt energies, which is one of the resources, and so if you roll it on this dice here, it's going to cost 0 energy to get out, and you just get a 3-1. And then if you rolled on this side, it's going to cost you 1, but it's a 3-2. And if you roll on this side, it's going to cost you 1, but it's a 4-3. So there's a little bit of variance on rolling good, depending on what dice you get, and it does affect the game. So there's that sort of variance. It's got variance like any other game, but it was actually a pretty neat little game, and it worked really well. Like, it had a meta. You could actually have cards that would... I remember one of the very earliest strategies was making this Wolverine unblockable and hexproof, basically. And so the meta had to shift, and they had to run these like cards that could actually interact with it, because it was such a hard strategy, because there's no stack. And it was, once you were able to give your Wolverine basically unblockable and double its power, you could actually like 2-shot people, if I remember correctly, with the meta back then. But people started to figure out builds that could actually beat it. And then they started producing cards that would actually hose those type of strategies. And it started to get the complexity of Magic the Gathering. And it's so sad the direction that WizKids went with this game, because as I said earlier in this video, I think it had legs. I think that this game could have been a really good game if they would have just focused on creating that community and creating the gameplay, and now the other stuff can fall in, and then you can like bring in another IP. And that is, unfortunately, that's the direction I think that Wizards of the Coast is going. And maybe they are bigger, they have the budget and they have that, but not really. You don't see, like, we're gonna be on to Final Fantasy. We're gonna sneeze, and then it's gonna be over, and everyone's gonna forget, or people aren't gonna be able to really like even like fully enjoy that. I mean, it might be standards, it'll be around a long time, so it'll come with its own problems. And then we'll be on to something else. And it just seems like it's just like kind of clickbaity thing. It's like, okay, let's get all the Final Fantasy fans in here. The funny thing is, Final Fantasy already has a TCG right now that failed. I don't know if it failed, but it didn't do that great. And again, I think that Wizards of the Coast hurry and grab Final Fantasy before Bandai, or, I mean, it's enough in the anime genre where Universe is, which not to be not to be confused with Universes Beyond. There's an entire card game playing system called Universes that now has, actually does have King Kong now. It does have that. So it'd be hard for like Ikoria to go back into getting that IP now that Universes has it. So it started with My Hero Academia was the big one, and then they brought in some of like, actually I think it started like with Street Fighter and like other Capcom games, and then they brought in My Hero Academia, and now they've actually brought in Attack on Titan. And so, I mean, Universes is already trying to do this whole IP grab with sort of the anime stuff. So maybe that's exactly why, Wizards of the Coast is trying to grab like Final Fantasy and all these other big ones before, Bandai and those can bring it. But again, I think that you need some space, you need some breathing room, and you really need to flesh out exactly how this is going to work before you just throw it out there. And I think Wizards of the Coast is making the exact same mistakes that WizKids made by just, okay, now we're just going to force this in standard, even though these things are quite different, even though, SpongeBob is or Spider-Man is quite different than Lord of the Rings. I mean, that is a whole different setting, and I know they've been doing that right with Kaladesh being a futuristic sort of theme as the first one they really messed around with. Now Kamigawa is set in the future, and we had Murder of Scarlet Manor was set in the future, and we have that sort of stuff that we're already driving cars and shooting guns, which was a lot different from the fantasy themes of Magic the Gathering. But I mean, it's a bigger step going from that to then going to this whole superhero genre set in the real world, set in New York. We're gonna have cards that are literally gonna be playing like New York, where Spider-Man is from. So I hope that it doesn't go down the same road. I hope that the Wizards of the Coast can kind of settle things down and scale things back a bit before it becomes such a convoluted mess like Dice Masters did, where again they didn't even give time for any of these games to settle in and for people to actually enjoy them before they're on a WWE. Have I seen that? Did they have to start doing like even sports? I think they did, like boxing, not just like wrestling. I think they really started doing some weird stuff with Dice Masters. Again, it's been years. I really thought the game was dead, and I was surprised when I checked Dice Masters to see if it was still in existence that it is. But as a game store owner, I'm not ordering it for anyone. I have hundreds of patrons that order things from. I have people that they request stuff all the time. I have never had Dice Masters requested since I've been doing this, and it was a very not household. What do we call it? A game store? Like every game store 10 years ago or 8 years ago, they carried it. They carried Dice Masters because it was that popular of a game. And I'd be interested in how many people in the comment section remember Dice Masters, or if you played it, and what your overall thoughts were of Dice Masters, because I enjoyed it. I thought it was great. I thought it had legs. I thought it could have gone somewhere. But WizKids just managed it so terribly bad. And they didn't respect their consumer base. They just thought people that were, oh, you're going to buy my next one. We're going to release this, and you're just going to buy it, and you're going to enjoy it. Even if you don't like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, you're going to buy it. And if you don't focus on the overall health of the game and have like healthy competition and cultivate things regionally and nationally and store by store, and really encourage and hype up these products and get people interested beyond, you have to get people interested that aren't interested. That's the whole point that they've been going with Wizards of the Coast. Is like, oh, well, Mark Rosewater, he's such a moron with this. It's like, well, not all products are for you. Not all products for you. So if you don't like Final Fantasy, just skip it. Well, of course, you can't skip it now. It's going to be in standard. You have no choice. You're going to need to pick up Final Fantasy cards if it's in standard. But that's kind of a stupid... I mean, you should... If you make a product, if you make a game that has a fan base, you should probably be creating products that everyone will at least be semi-interested in, or at least really try to interest them in that product. Do your effort and to be like, well, maybe you might not be a Final Fantasy fan, but here's why you should get excited about this set. I mean, that's what the whole point to crossovers is to try to cross people over into something that they might not have ever engaged in. And I think that is, in a nutshell, Wizards of the Coast's whole little strategy. Like, well, this product's not for you. I mean, they're just like, they're throwing darts at the dartboard and just, hoping some of them stick and being like, okay, if this one fails, whatever, we'll go on to the next one. And this game is a massive warning sign to how that cannot work. They picked up every big IP possible. The Marvels, the DCs, again, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. They started hitting on nostalgia, D&D, Yu-Gi-Oh! They were picking up everything because they thought, oh wow, if we got all these fans from comic books in, let's get all these fans from Yu-Gi-Oh! And let's get all these fans from... Oh boy, it did not work out. This game, that was the downfall of this game. It wasn't the lack of interest. It wasn't the game had no legs to begin with. It was literally that if you become so unfocused, yeah, you basically lose focus of people and they move on to something else. And so it was sad. It was sad to see this game die. Like I said, I enjoyed it because it scratched that magic itch enough that it was worthwhile to branch out and play it. And I had teams. I had a whole Batman team that was fun. I didn't care. This is me personally. I didn't care about Marvel or DC, but I created decks with it. I had even was able to play their like legacy format where you can build anything. And there was like, I remember there's some dwarven priest out of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Or out of the D&D set that was so popular. And, we were selling them for like $20 all day long. And it was crazy. It was crazy that the reception for Dice Masters. And it was like overnight when it just got so saturated that it went from, places like Cool Stuff Inc. paying premium for dice to where, no store would even want to touch it. And I remember Cool Stuff, I think, just like sold it all on eBay one day. They like sold their entire lot of stuff and everyone kind of got out of it. So I still have a massive amount of this Dice Master that's just sitting in my store. Like I was hoping that someday it could just be revived, that someone should take up the mantle. But it's sad to see Wizards of the Coast kind of go this direction because these companies, that's why I never had faith in Lorcana, because I thought that Ravensburger would treat Lorcana the same way they treated every one of their other games they've done, and they've really chased these IPs. They've really chased the flavor of the week and not really focused again mechanically on the games, the community. They haven't focused on like building up there. Oh, the next clickbait thing, the next pop culture thing, we're just going to double down on. It's going to sell itself. And credits where credits due, Lorcana seems to manage this game, or Ravensburger seem to manage this game a lot better than I thought they would. And credit where with like Universes too. Universes is trying to, I think, do it, and unfortunately it's failing, but I think they're trying to do it in the right way of picking up these new IPs, but trying to integrate them properly into their Universes system. The problem with Universes, though, is the system itself, the game itself, is not that deep. It's not that, in my opinion, enjoyable, and it's not that, like, it's harder to get people, I mean, it's a step up from, like, Weiss Schwartz system, which is, does anyone even play that game? I know it has a game behind it, but that was literally just people trying to collect anime cards. There wasn't really much of a game behind it. And at least Universes is just trying with that to try to establish like this game. And they had some big tournaments too over the years with like regionals, nationals, worlds, and things that did have quite a bit of fan base, but that's pretty much died too. And it hasn't worked out for them either with trying to really go on all these different IP directions and stuff too. So I don't know, that's what I like to see from Wizards of the Coast, is a slow down, reach back into their core. If they want to bring in these IPs, if they want to bring in these other ways to play Magic the Gathering, they need to re-engage their fan base, make sure that core is strong before they go on to this latest pop culture of the week. So it's actually very scary. At first I was just frustrated. I was just like, I was kind of mad because the thing I was into is being kind of corrupted or tainted. But now I'm starting to get nervous and worried with this whole decision that Wizards of the Coast has gone down, that it could ultimately lead to Not the collapse of the game, because it might just be too big. There's too much. I mean, the game's the best game. The card game, it's inarguably the best way to play a card game. There have been so many other card games that have tried even Lorcana to create a better game or whatnot, and nothing's come close to Richard Garfield's system of Magic the Gathering. And so it's got that going for it that, you know, none of these other games, I mean, all of them would salivate at having that, the mechanically speaking part of Magic the Gathering. But at the same time, they can still do a lot of damage by, you know, this whole scattershot approach of trying to appeal to so many people where it starts to appeal to no one. So hopefully I'm wrong. Hopefully that this just becomes the biggest game ever, even bigger than it is now, and becomes a household name like Pokemon Go was. Who knows? Maybe that's what they're trying to do. But I don't know. I've seen this happen time and time again, and I think it's a good example. Go check out the kind of history of Dice Master. So I think that if someone else knows like a Dice Master channel or something that can give a better iteration of, you know, what happened with this, I'd like to see their opinions, because I was pretty immersed in the. I remember, I think of it on Reddit. I never use Reddit anymore. I mean, my account's dead. But I remember being part of the Dice Masters Reddit subreddit, and I remember being part of some other websites that talked about Dice Masters, and I wanted to treat it the same way that I treated Magic the Gathering with. Like, I think I still have the channel Rogue Dice Master. Like, I actually made it. Like, made the Rogue Dice Master in case I ever decide to make content for this game. So I don't know. It's pretty scary times with Magic the Gathering. Hopefully they can get their act together. Hopefully they can quit being so tone deaf and actually, you know, and that's kind of what I want. Is I want some better communication. And as I stated earlier in this video, I don't really mind going off on these other IPs as long as they can still keep people engaged. And we can have some clear answers on exactly how this is going to affect formats, how are these cards going to be played, what's the overall future goal for integrating this in, and then I'd be a lot more at ease than this whole, like, you're going to like it or not. Or basically that's kind of the sentiment that the Wizard of the Coast have. It's like, you're going to like it or you can go find something else. Okay, well, people will just go find something else. There's plenty of hobbies out there. There's plenty of games out there. And it's kind of sad to see things go this way. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video down memory lane with good old Dice Masters. Again, if you ever play this game in the comments, please comment in the comment section below. And is it still even alive? Is there still like a system for Dice Masters or people playing it? I don't know. Let me know. Thanks for watching.